Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm John Tucker.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, let's begin with mixed results from high-tech. Shares of Apple right now down 1.1% in early trading. Apple says total sales in the December period are going to rise by a percentage in the low to middle single digits. Analysts had been projecting a 7% increase. Apple CEO Tim Cook says he was happy with the recent quarter.
iPhone grew in every geographic segment, marking a new September quarter revenue record for the category. And services set an all-time revenue record, up 12% year over year. We also set September quarter segment revenue records in the Americas, Europe, and the rest of Asia Pacific, as well as in a large number of countries.
Apple CEO Tim Cook also weighing on the stock this morning. The company posted a decline in China revenue last quarter, falling short of estimates.
Well, on the flip side, John, Amazon shares are up more than 5.5%. Total third quarter revenue increased 11% to almost $159 billion. Operating profit was $17.4 billion, demolishing the average estimate by $2.7 billion, or by 2.7. The company has been spending heavily on the new data centers required for the boom and demand for artificial intelligence services. CEO Andy Jassy says investors will see that spending pay off in the long run.
It is a really unusually large, maybe once-in-a-lifetime type of opportunity. And I think our customers, the business, and our shareholders will feel good about this long term, that we're aggressively pursuing it.
Analysts say CEO Andy Jassy's years-long push to cut costs and streamline Amazon's logistics operation have paid off.
And shares in Intel, they're up more than 5% pre-market. The chipmaker forecasts fourth quarter revenue above estimates, so that's sparking optimism the company can win back some of its lost market share. Intel, once the industry leader in computer processors, is now working to preserve cash to fund a turnaround plan. And we spoke with the Intel CEO, Pat Gelsinger.
We've taken these steps this quarter and restructuring and getting our costs where they need to be. We have the capacity to go on the journey.
In the prior quarter, the CEO, Pat Gelsinger, cut jobs, slashed spending, and suspended investor payouts.
Well, John, the earnings continue this morning with big oil on tap, and today we hear from ExxonMobil. We get a preview from Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
ExxonMobil investors will likely focus on the company's ongoing production growth, especially in the Permian Basin of West Texas and New Mexico and in Guyana. Also in focus, recent cost-cutting initiatives that are expected to give profitability a boost despite slightly lower crude prices. Bloomberg consensus calls for revenue of $87.2 billion and adjusted earnings per share of $1.87. Tom Busby, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Tom. And speaking of oil, crude oil on the rise this morning. This follows a report that Iran could be preparing an attack on Israel. Axios, citing two Israeli sources, say Tehran is planning a strike through militias that it backs in Iraq. And as we check Brent, the international benchmark, up 2.6%, 74.75 a barrel. NYMEX crude, 71.22 a barrel. That's up 2.8%.
Well, John, Boeing shares, they're also on the rise. They're up 2.3%. The plane maker and union leaders, representing 33,000 striking workers, reached a tentative agreement to end a lengthy labor dispute that's been crippling the company's commercial airplane manufacturing. The agreement would boost wages by 38% over 4 years and give workers a $12,000 signing bonus if approved. The union says members will vote Monday on the new contract offer.
And speaking of jobs, Karen, this morning we're going to get the latest reading of the labor market with the October jobs report. Let's get a preview right now from Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
The payrolls number is something of a black hole for October. The Boeing strike will take some workers out of the numbers, as will Hurricanes Helene and Milton. But nobody knows how many will fall out. Bloomberg Economics estimates it could be as many as 150,000, which would produce a negative payroll print for the first time since the pandemic. At the other end of the spectrum, Steve Risciuto of Mizuho sees 180,000 jobs, just over the average of the past 6 months. ADP on Wednesday reported finding 233,000 new jobs. The mystery will be answered at 8:30 Eastern Time. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Michael, thank you. Now to the final days of the 2024 presidential election campaign. Vice President Kamala Harris is aiming to shore up votes across crucial swing states, with most polls indicating the race is a toss-up. Yesterday in Nevada, Harris seized on Donald Trump's remark that he'd protect women if elected, whether they like it or not.
This is not the first time he has told us he does not believe women should have authority or agency over their own bodies.
Kamala Harris further called Trump's comments about women very offensive. The vice president will rally tonight in Milwaukee. She'll be joined by several musical guests, including rapper Cardi B. It comes after Harris secured the endorsement of basketball star LeBron James yesterday.
Donald Trump also heads to Wisconsin tonight. His campaign's touting a celebrity endorsement of its own. The YouTube star Jake Paul looks to drum up support from young voters. The former president traveled across the Southwest yesterday, attacking Harris while encouraging supporters to vote.
On Tuesday, you have to stand up and you have to tell Kamala that you've had enough. You can't take it anymore. She's horrible.
But despite those comments, Donald Trump still sowing doubt in the election results should he lose. He insists he's poised for a runaway victory, barring alleged voter fraud. And it comes as Trump announced he's suing CBS Broadcasting, alleging the network engaged in election interference when it aired different versions of a 60 Minutes interview with the Vice President Harris. A network spokesperson says the lawsuit lacks merit.
Well, John, join us for complete coverage of election results Tuesday night. It all kicks off at 5 p.m. Eastern with a special 2-hour edition of Balance of Power, followed by Coast to Coast to Bloomberg team coverage at 7 p.m. Get live election results and analysis with context Tuesday night on Bloomberg Radio, television, and the Bloomberg Podcast YouTube channel. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Words of warning for North Korean troops training to fight for Russia inside Ukraine. The U.S. says those troops will be treated the same as Russians by the Ukrainian military. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says around 8,000 North Korean troops are now stationed in the Kursk region of Russia.
Russia has been training DPRK soldiers in artillery, UAVs, basic infantry operations, including trench clearing, indicating that they fully intend to use these forces in frontline operations.
Secretary Blinken says they expect Russia to begin mobilizing these troops in the coming days. Crews are searching for bodies in stranded cars and sodden buildings as residents salvage what they can from ruined homes following monstrous flash floods in Spain that claimed at least 158 lives. The death toll could rise more as search efforts continue. An unknown number remains missing. Since the 2020 election, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency has been doing everything possible to reassure voters and correct any disinformation about the integrity of the American vote. Accusations of tampering and ballot dumping have made polling workers feel unsafe. CISA Director Jen Easterly says seeing election workers subjected to threats, harassment, and in some cases forced to work behind bulletproof glass is very discouraging to her.
They're not faceless bureaucrats. They're our friends. They're our neighbors. We see them in the community every single day, and they're not doing it for pay or for glory. They're doing it because they believe in our democracy, and they deserve respect.
Meanwhile, police in Portland, Oregon and Vancouver, Washington are still looking for the suspect who set fires to voting drop boxes. A jury has been seated to hear the subway chokehold case against Daniel Penny, with opening statements scheduled for today. The jury is comprised of 7 women and 5 men, including 4 people of color. The defense used their challenges to strike at least 10 people of color. Daniel Penny, a white Marine veteran, pleads not guilty to manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide. He put a black man acting erratically in a New York City subway car into a fatal chokehold last year. Witnesses say the man, Jordan Neely, had been shouting and demanding money. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With the Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. It is time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Here's John's Stash Hour. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Throughout October, of course, the New York baseball teams provided almost daily excitement, though both their seasons ended with losses to the Dodgers. The NFL teams in New York, not so good, both with 2-6 records to begin Week 9. But on the final night of the month at MetLife Stadium, the Jets got a much-needed win, ending their 5-game losing streak, beating the Texans 21-13 with Aaron Rodgers throwing 3 second-half touchdown passes. The first 2 went to Garrett Wilson, and both catches were made with one hand. The second one, an especially highlight reel grab that came on a 3rd and 19, was originally ruled out of bounds but changed on replay. Here was Wilson after the game.
First one is just a drag route, and Aaron, comes to me late in progression, and I got to make a play, and luckily it blew wide open. After I caught the ball, let's go score a touchdown, The second one, 3rd down, and he trusted me to go make a play again, right? He comes to me, it's kind of a down that no one expects us to convert, and, that can't be our mindset. We're the only ones that thought we were going to convert there.
Also, the first Jet touchdown for Devontae Adams. He came out of concussion protocol to score the final TD. First win for the new Jets coach, Jeff Ulbrich, the Houston QB. C.J. Stroud just 11 of 30. 2-6 Giants are back at MetLife on Sunday to play the 6-2 Washington Commanders. Big game in the NFC North. 6-1 Detroit at 5-2 Green Bay. The Packers may have their QB Jordan Love despite leaving last week's game with an injured groin. He was back at practice yesterday. In Baltimore, Lamar Jackson has not practiced yet this week, said to be nursing back and knee injuries. As for those Dodgers, they'll be honored today in L.A. A parade, a ceremony at Dodger Stadium. Freddie Freeman figures to get the biggest ovation, had one of the greatest World Series ever despite an ankle injury. And now ESPN reporting Freeman was also playing with a broken rib. World Series ratings on Fox, highest since 2017, averaging almost 16 million viewers. Last year's World Series drew an average of 9 million. John Stash Hour, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and John.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios this morning, where it is coming up on 5:13 on Wall Street. Apple and Amazon delivering earnings after the close of regular trading. And pre-market shares of Apple, they are down over 1%. Amazon shares are up over 5%. Let's break down the results now with Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta. Kriti, good morning. Thanks for being with us. With Apple, sales, China, regulatory concerns, where do you want to start?
Yeah, let's start with the China piece because that seems to be the biggest takeaway from the Apple story. Yes, iPhone revenue grew in every single region, and that's kind of the top line from Tim Cook's comments post-earnings. But it's that China story that really matters here, simply because that's their growth market. That's where Apple's trying to not only secure some of their supply chains, which they have partially moved to India, by the way, but it's also where they're trying to access their consumer at a time when they're also doing a little bit of the catch-up trade on AI. Both of those concepts are kind of married in what happened about almost 2 months ago now I'm thinking about it, when it came to the latest iPhone launch. I think it was early September 9th, if memory serves me right, when just 24 hours later, Huawei launched their own kind of latest smartphone as well. And I think that speaks to this idea that the market share that Apple was trying to gain in China has kind of been cannibalized by the Huawei rival and the Huawei product. And that's really what's eating into these margins. Nevertheless, it looks like they are still selling their product. People are still buying it. And for that reason, you're not seeing Apple shares down this morning as much as perhaps expected.
The Apple Intelligence features, is that captured in the September quarter?
It's not quite yet. And remember, this is one of the things that has been a little bit of a handicap for the stock, or an overhang for the stock, and that when you're comparing it to some of the other big tech names, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, even though they are very different businesses from Apple, they are still trading higher on this kind of AI trade. Apple has been the notable laggard simply because they haven't been able to really capitalize on that technology. And they've only just now released that AI technology in some of their latest updates for the iPhone. So it's not going to show up in this latest quarter, but it might in the next few.
Apple Services, you got to explain to me what that is and how's it doing, that end of the business.
Oh, I love this. So Apple Services is my personal obsession. Oh. And the reason I say this, you've tapped into a rich area, John Tucker. I say this because this was really crucial data and crucial revenue for Apple during the pandemic. And Apple Services is basically every time you go into the Apple store, you get your screen fixed, you get a Apple update, you need some help from kind of the Genius Bar. That, among several of the other kind of app functions, comes under the umbrella of Apple Services and makes up about a third of their revenue. revenue. And during COVID, that's the part that really tanked because nobody was going into Apple. So from a macro signal, which is kind of how I like to look at it, it's very crucial for Apple's kind of mobility story because Apple, at the end of the day, it's a hardware company, but it wants to be more than that.
Okay, let's move on to Amazon, now up 6% pre-market. Seem to be several pillars. You have e-commerce, advertising, cloud services. How did they deliver? Got about a little more than a minute.
Let's talk about AWS. I think that's the takeaway here. Remember,
Amazon Web Services.
Amazon Web Services. This is the number 2 player in the cloud space, second to Microsoft's Azure. The top line you need to know, and one number, is 38%. That's the margin of revenue that Amazon is making on their cloud unit. And it is the highest record margin they've made going all the way back to data in 2014. By comparison, Alphabet's cloud unit is trying to keep up. They're trying to break into this, and their margin is only 17%. So that's where Amazon is really wowing investors.
And they cut costs. It's not just cost cutting. It's a kind of an effort, I guess, to reallocate resources. Real quick, how did that work out?
They're still in the process. Remember, they have a logistics unit that hasn't been doing as well. So they're in the works of it, but the e-commerce results coming in stronger than expected as well.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
I'm John Tucker. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.